Moving on to skills. In your resume, skills are a total buzzkill. So when you're doing your resume, you want to weed these out as much as possible. In your LinkedIn, however, skills are very important. They actually make a meaningful difference in whether you're discovered by recruiters in searches, especially if you're in a very technical career. So let's talk about this. LinkedIn allows you to add up to 50 skills in your skills and endorsement section. And once you've added a skill, people can endorse you and kind of vote on whether you're good at that or not. Ruthlessly prioritize technical skills heavily. So technical skills might be things like I know how to use Tableau, or I'm good at SQL, or Ruby, or Python, or you're a growth marketer, something that really talks to the kind of more trainable and harder to acquire skills. Technical skills are not skills around stakeholder engagement, or I'm great at politics, or I have leadership skills. These are skills that are very important for your professional development, but they're also very subjective. What you might consider to be leadership may very much differ from what the company you're applying for considers to be leadership. And so a lot of times when recruiters look for you and they try to find you, they filter on the technical skills and then they interview and screen you for the soft skills. So putting soft skills here is not very helpful because it's not something a recruiter would typically look for. You definitely can max this section up, but only the top 10 skills that you add will show as part of this section. So the first thing that you really want to be careful of is the first 10 skills that you add will be your top skills. So if you've added a ton or you're adding over time, unfortunately, you kind of have to go back and delete and re-add things to make sure that the first 10 you added are the ones that show in your profile summary. And the first 10 are also the ones that LinkedIn will actively ask folks to endorse you on. So these do end up being very important over time, and you should definitely prune that list or edit that list if you are really changing your professional profile, or maybe you've picked up a new language that you're working in. Make sure that you keep this very much up to date. And also make sure, as we talked about, that these are actually keyword skills. And the way that you know that is as you're typing up your skills inside of LinkedIn, LinkedIn will usually auto-complete with skills that are already listed. And those are called keyword skills. So make sure that those are not free-form things that you invented as a skill, but things that folks would actually search on. The only purpose of this section is to really help recruiting professionals find you and connect with you. So please be very mindful of which skills you select. So I talked a little bit about endorsements. I wanted to show you what this actually looks like because it's something that LinkedIn's been doing a bit more aggressively recently. So when you look at somebody's profile, sometimes they'll ask you, "Oh, is Colleen really good at Excel? Would you say that's the case?" And so when somebody says yes, you receive an endorsement for that skill. So it's not something that you can actively go ask for, typically, and most folks don't. It is something that is mostly collected through folks passively clicking on your profile as they're looking you up. And over time, you can accumulate a lot of endorsements. And in some professions, those endorsements actually matter a lot. So in this case, securities and hedge funds, hedge funds are very highly technical. And so having a ton of endorsements from people who maybe are also hedge fund professionals could be helpful to you. To be quite honest, as I mentioned before, this is more of a vanity metric or more of a follow-up that a recruiter might look at. It's not necessarily something they will actively look for and actively search for because I showed you the dashboard earlier, and it's not something that's really on their radar until they've already reached out to you and maybe you're doing a deeper check on you. Listing your education correctly is important, and we chatted about that earlier, but I really think we should touch on it very briefly one more time so I could give you a bit more context on what I mean. Here's an example of a good profile where education is listed correctly. So what I mean by that is a lot of times recruiters are interested in what school you went to, and some companies will have a preference what pools they recruit from. So making sure that you actually find your university and the logo properly shows up is very, very, very important because that allows a recruiter to select that school and find you as having graduated that school. which is a big deal. Make sure that your actual professional education, so things like an accredited degree, for instance, here from Cornell or from the University of Oslo, are the first things that show up on your education profile. And then other certifications like, maybe Udemy, Coursera, TripleByte, or other things that you might participate in are showing up as a secondary thing. Just visually, if somebody scrolls down and looks at your profile and you just have these certifications floating in there, they might not scroll down enough to see that you are also properly credentialed for an accredited institution. So make sure that these are showing up and make sure they're linked correctly so folks can filter for you. And very much the same way that a recruiter can find you, you can find people at companies who are alumni of the organization you attended. So if you click on the logo of your university after you've added it, you can see a list of alumni and freely browse it, and also filter and search it, which is a very little known and used feature, and a very easy hack of how to get a ton of coffees and get hired very easily. Even if you're not from a top school, you would be incredibly surprised how many of your former classmates, maybe not the same year, but maybe ahead or behind you, are at companies that you would die to work for. So don't discount that at all. And very briefly, volunteer experience is not welcome on your resume, but is very welcome on your LinkedIn. It is a really great social signal. And if you do have it, I would very highly encourage you to put that up there as well. So just a couple of more things before we wrap up, and then I'll take some questions. Recommendations only work when they're detailed and very specific. I get a lot of questions around, is there any point in me having 10 recommendations? Would people like me more, or 40 recommendations, or how do I get more recommendations? Recommendations are great if people have worked with you directly and they have a very specific example of what project they worked with you on, and how exactly you were able to help. Recommendations are something that is good for professionals that are starting out and for professionals that are midstream in their career. They're not something that senior professionals should want on their profile or need on their profile. And senior folks should be more in the position of giving these recommendations than receiving them. If you're a student, a recommendation that you're really looking for and should covet aggressively is a recommendation from your professor or a recommendation from your TA. These are just insanely valuable as an employer looking for interns. Being able to look through that is a very good signal. And a recommendation written letter is amazing as well, but this is a better, more lasting way in some cases to look at that for interns and junior folks. So that's really good. If you've worked with another student on a joint project and they can describe in detail what you did on that project together, that would be a solid recommendation as well. And then for folks that are kind of midstream professionals, a really good example of recommendations that work well are if you're a consultant. So if you work for PwC or Accenture or the Big Four, having recommendations from former clients or companies you are assigned to support is basically pure gold. And if you are a midstream professional, when you move or transition jobs, having recommendations from former coworkers or former bosses or senior leadership can be useful, but it's not worth the trouble if they don't organically come to you to go and try to accumulate all of these. So again, very useful in the beginning of your career, and they diminish in use the more senior you become. And the last thing I want to cover today, and we'll do a bit of a more in-depth LinkedIn workshop probably next week because we're running short on time today and I want to leave time for your questions. So the last thing I'll touch on is accomplishments. This is another question that I get a lot. So there's a whole accomplishments section in LinkedIn at the very bottom, and it can be kind of confusing what to list in there and what are things that are helpful versus what are things that are not. So in the accomplishments section, you want to definitely list things that you are super proud of. So some examples are university or different school awards you might have received, professional awards. So if your job has an employee of the month or kind of similar type of initiative, that would be really great to highlight. Any industry awards that people would recognize. This is also in the accomplishments section, a place where you could put patents. if you're more technical, and patents are an amazing things to have on your LinkedIn. You could also do kind of things that are more project related. So this is a place where you could put an additional link to your portfolio if you're a data scientist or a creative. You could put, things that are different licenses, even if the licenses are not related to your specific job. So for instance, a lot of people in tech fly, and so a lot of folks here put their pilot's license. It's a great conversation starter, and it's also something that's incredibly technically difficult to learn. So it's just interesting point of reference. If you speak other languages fluently, this is a good place to put that as well.
Candor helps tech professionals get paid more.